Our goal here with typography is to cover the same principles used by design leaders throughout the industry. Not only typography that looks beautiful to humans, but text that's been formatted with search engines and accessibility in mind. That includes fonts and weights and size, color and alignment and breaking and letter spacing. After a few minutes, it was obvious this dry list of properties wasn't going to cut it. Plus, the screenshot of Google we showed at the front had not one but 3 colors off from the proper logo. So let's do this differently. There's a lot to cover. We have headings that'll include hierarchy and page organization, indicators and tags, which are magic. We'll cover text fills, that's knockout text using backgrounds or gradients. We'll talk about paragraphs and text inheritance. We'll talk about using spans to style parts of our text. We'll cover different typography units. And finally, we'll cover advanced quantum key distribution, except we won't because we'll use that time originally allotted for physics and instead cover accessibility and inclusive typography. Let's start with headings because they're more than just big text. And when we add a heading to the project, we have our immediate options. We'll get to a lot of them, but let's start with this question. Is it an H1, an H2, an H3, which is ammonia? In terms of hierarchy, it's helpful to think of our headings, wherever they are on the page, as content guides. That is, someone should be able to understand the way the content on our page is organized by glancing at the headings. And a great way to think of this is the front page of a newspaper. In this context, an H1 would be the big statement on the page. H2s would be smaller headings that fit into our big statement. And H3s are even more detailed. And something to note when styling headings, there are 2 major ways to do this. How you go about it will have serious implications for how you use—
I found this on the web for implicating—
Not now, Siri.
I've had it up to here. Don't even.
That's the big question here. The big question is, how should we style headings on the web? And there are 2 things that factor into styling headings: classes and tags. So let's start with classes. With our heading selected, we can create a class. We'll just click into the selector field and name a class. We'll name ours Big Heading and hit return, but you can name yours whatever makes sense to you. And the class we created will remember all the styling changes we make. So as we change the font, or if we go and change the weight of our typography, the class we made, Big Heading, will remember these changes. Any change is indicated by the label turning blue. If we want to remove a change, we just reset that property. And of course, when we want to reuse that class, when we want those same changes, those blue labels to apply to another heading, we just make sure the new heading is selected, click in, start typing, and select our Big Heading. That's it. And now if we change either of them, that change is reflected on the other heading. That's because we're not styling the heading itself, we're styling the class we've applied to both headings, our Big Heading class. Now, we also mentioned tags. This is the second and really powerful way to style headings. For elements like headings and paragraphs, text links, we have special tags that let you change the default styling of all H1 headings. So with any heading selected, we can click in without even adding a class, and we can go to the All H1 Headings tag. And changes we make here, maybe we want all H1s to be a heavier font weight by default, and maybe we want these H1s to be a different color. We make the change here, and now, anytime someone adds another H1, it has that styling applied. In fact, with any H1 selected, we can click on the amber colored indicator for font color and see that it's taking its styling cues from the All H1 Headings tag. And we'll talk more about tags in a moment because it's actually even more powerful than what we just covered. But for now, we want to talk more about styling classes and styling the text itself using text fills. This uses what's called clipping. And text fills apply to the inside of the actual glyphs. Here's a heading. By default, the text fill is going to use the font color. If we change the font color, the text is predictably that color, pretty straightforward. And when we made that change, a class was automatically created for us. If we want, we can click in to rename that class Bigger Heading. But what about backgrounds? Let's go in and set a background on this text element. And for right now, let's make it a gradient. And we can double click to go in and choose our first stop. That's the first stop color. And of course, let's choose our second stop color. Same deal here. Now, even if we adjust our angle here, this isn't really the look we're going for, because in order to clip our background to the text and not just sit behind the text, we need to choose our clipping option. And we'll clip it here to the text. And that's it. If we make a change to our gradient, it updates inside the text in real time. Now, we could put any background or even stack multiple backgrounds using this method. In fact, When the background is clipped to text, it's going to ignore the font color and instead use whatever is set in your backgrounds section. But that's text fills. Let's talk about paragraphs. Well, paragraphs are a myth, except they're real. They're absolutely real. Here are several of them, and we could use classes on paragraphs. Maybe we want 1.5 spacing. In fact, we can make our line height 1.5 and type the hyphen key and then return. Now we're using scalable unitless line height, which scales proportionally with the font size. But what happens when we want to apply this brand new style to other paragraphs? Well, now we have to apply this to other paragraphs, and this gets tedious, but it doesn't have to be. Few options here. This is the real power of text inheritance in CSS, and it works like this. We can select our body element. We can do this on any page, and go over to style our body all pages tag. And by the way, if you already have a class applied to your page body, you can get to the tag by clicking the little inheritance dropdown thing. But what is the body all pages tag? This is our top level tag, and a change here, like the font, will pass down through the hierarchy to all our text. This is a great way to set defaults, like our default font on a project. Even though we just styled the body all pages tag, we can go into a more specific tag by selecting any paragraph and editing the all paragraphs tag. Maybe we want all paragraphs to have some more breathing room, some more margin on the bottom, so we can better differentiate between groupings. But let's go further. Maybe we like our default font we said a moment ago, but we want all paragraphs to be a different font. Right now, if we click into the font, we see it's taking its cues from the body all pages tag. That makes sense, considering we just did that. But we can override. We can change the font on all paragraphs without messing with other types of elements. So we have a default font on our project that's being inherited by text everywhere. We have a different font that just applies to paragraphs. Now, what if we were slightly more extreme? What if we wanted even more specific customization? Maybe we want this one paragraph to be styled differently yet again. On this paragraph, we can see that the font is coming from the all paragraphs tag, but what if a class was applied? Well, a class is automatically created on something the moment we style a specific property. So if we just change the font, it'll automatically create a class. Let's click in to rename that class. We'll call it Special Paragraph. And once we do that, we unlock secret stealth superpowers, because now we can go up and click in to see the entire inheritance hierarchy. This paragraph is taking cues from the class, which is taking its cues from all paragraphs, which is taking its cues from the body class, which is taking its cues from the body all pages tag, which is taking its cues from John Williams. And that's inheritance in the context of paragraphs. What about spans, styling only part of a text element? Well, here's a paragraph. We know that because it says paragraph. And if we double click to edit, we can highlight any specific characters or words and bold them. We can pick other words and italicize them. We can pick a few more and add a link to whatever website we want. And when we're done, it looks like a dumpster fire. So we can always select part of our text, or maybe all of it, and just clear formatting. That clears bolds, italicized stuff, it clears links. But there's one text formatting option that gives us nearly unlimited power. The lesser known seventh infinity stone is span. With any text selected, we can wrap that text with a span. And once we do, we can create a class on that specific part of the text, highlight. And with that, maybe we want this text to look like it's highlighted. So we can just set a background color on the text itself. Of course, we can change the font, we can make any overrides we want. And what's happening is the span is a more specific style on our selected text, and that style builds off whatever we're inheriting from the paragraph. And if we want to clear out that span, same thing as before, highlight the text, clear formatting, you know the drill. That's wrapping things with a span. Let's move on to units, starting with pixels. And let's clear up something. A lot of typography units on the modern web are set in pixels. There's nothing wrong with pixels. They're used by Apple and Sketch and Stripe and Google to set things like font size. So by default, we can set our font size in pixels. That's what happens if we just type in a number and hit return. But here's the problem as it relates to line height. As we change the font size in pixels, notice how things are starting to get crushed. That's because if we want our line height to scale proportionally, we have to set it to something that scales proportionally. If we type 1.4 and then a little hyphen, when we hit return, we've now set our line height to unitless. The line height is 1.4 times whatever the font size is. Change our font size, even if we change it quite dramatically, the line height scales with it. But we'll cover some other options here too, starting with M's, specifically on the font size. And if you're curious about the etymology, an M was originally based on the width of a typeface's capital M. That's where M comes from. It's phonetic. Also, second piece of trivia, it's why an M dash is called an M dash. Let's select this paragraph and set it to 1M. Let's set the font size to 1M. And what's happening here? What is an M and why is a pen on the top of the screen? Well, when it comes to M's, it goes like this. Every project has a default font size. It's in the body all pages tag, but you can change this. Let's make ours 16 pixels. Here's a paragraph in a div block inside the page body. And there's nothing typography specific we set on the div block, and really nothing on the paragraph either. So what that means for M's is this. 1M on the paragraph is going to equal 16 pixels. That's because 1M is going to equal whatever font size this paragraph is inheriting. In this case, it's inheriting the font size from the body all pages tag. But it scales proportionally. So 1M is 16 pixels. 2M's, that's 32 pixels. 1.5M's is 24 pixels. Makes sense. But check this out. We can also set the font size on its parent, the div block called card layout. 20 pixels on the div block here. Now the paragraph is sized based on that because the div block we just messed with is more specific than the body. 1M is now 20 pixels. 2M's is 40 pixels. 3M's, you get the idea. Again, M's look to their parents and scale the font size proportionally. However, what if our paragraph is set to 1.5M's and the div block is set to 1.5M's as well? Well, here's where inheritance and trigonometric calculus collide. But if you don't want to keep track of nesting, especially in hierarchically complex typography.
That's not how you say hierarchically.
No, it's hierarchically.
It's Irish.
Nope.
Hierarchically.
Nope.
It comes from shirocrotagonally.
There's no way that's right.
I have spoken.
You can always use rems, root M's. Let's go back to our same example. It's a mess, but none of it matters because rems, instead of being sized relative to their parent and that parent's parent, rems are relative to the HTML font size, which is going to respect the browser's default font size. If we go into our Chrome settings, for instance, we can set the browser's default font size, which is usually 16 pixels. In fact, let's leave it where it is for now. And wherever we are in the hierarchy, setting something to 1 rem will equal 16 pixels. It skips all the other mess and goes straight to the root. These are root M's, rems. That means 2 rems, 32 pixels. 3 rems, 48 pixels. And all of this is constant, even if you change literally all the numbers in between, because a rem is calculated by taking whatever your rem value is and multiplying it by the HTML font size, which, unless you manually change it in the code, will respect the browser's font size. This has the benefit of respecting a user's browser preferences if a custom text size is set on the browser. In addition to M's and rems, we have percentages. Like M's, the percentage is going to refer to the parent's element font size. We also have viewport width. VW, of course, is both a measurement of the width of the browser's viewport and a manufacturer of the Passat. And when we set a text element to VW, it will scale proportionally based on the width of the viewport. And of course, we have CH. This one's great for sizing something like a paragraph or a heading to limit the number of characters someone has to read per line. We'll talk about that in the next section. But here's how CH works. If we set a paragraph's maximum width to 60 CH, what happens? Nothing, because we have to hit return. But when we do, it now has this seemingly arbitrary maximum width, but it's not arbitrary at all. It's taking the selected font, the typeface we're using on the paragraph, and setting the paragraph's boundary, its box, to 60 of that font's number 0. Don't believe it? Here's 60 zeros. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
Yeah.
Hey,
What's up?
you count to 60?
Typography?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask him to cut it.
How much?
Nobody needs to see you count to 60.
So you're just gonna...
Yeah, I'm cutting it.
What's gonna be there instead?
Nothing. We can just cut right as I finish my sentence.
So CH lets us set the width on a text element if we're trying to limit the number of characters, and it bases that width on the font's 0 character. Now, when it comes to font size, in most cases, pixel values are a safe bet. We have alternatives like ems, rems, percentages, viewport width, ch is. And the best way to get familiar with all of these is to try them out inside a project to see how they interact. We can see these changes right on the canvas and simulate browser and device widths at any time. And of course, we have full documentation on all these units in much more detail, so check that out on Webflow University if you haven't yet done so. Let's move on to accessibility, and we'll cover a lot of characteristics of more inclusive design here. These are all important things to consider when designing for the web, and we'll do 9 of these here. First is font legibility. Thin fonts were a huge trend back in 2013 or so, but let's push this to an extreme to prove a point. Fonts that are ultra thin are extremely difficult to read, not only in headings, but especially in paragraphs. This is also the case with uneven weight distribution. There's these kind of characters which aren't very legible. So consider how legible your fonts are. Second is alignment of text, especially as it relates to paragraphs. Something to consider here, this is pretty big, a jagged or uneven rag, in typography this is a rag, the whole thing can create a sort of disjunct reading experience. And this is really evident on centered text because that jagged alignment, this kind of rag, makes it really tough for the reader to follow the text from line to line. So it helps to consider alignment and how that alignment contributes to legibility. Next is all caps. Languages that distinguish between capitalized and lowercase letters are often far more legible when written in sentence case or title case. That is, where you write out the text by using capitalization only where it's needed or expected. That's because all caps can introduce a heavier cognitive load for the reader, especially in longer paragraphs. Consider limiting the use of all caps on longer strings of text as you're designing and iterating on your typography. Number 4, underlines. There's an expectation on the web that underlined text means a thing is a hyperlink. If you want to or you need to draw emphasis to something, consider italicizing or bolding it, or even making stylistic changes by wrapping things with a span, as we covered earlier in this lesson. Number 5 is contrast. This one's huge, and we can all do better here. Contrast in this context is the measurement of the difference between background and foreground. Low contrast would be somewhat lighter gray on somewhat darker gray, or maroon on red, or purple on pink, or in this extreme example, retina warning, pure red on pure blue. You can use a contrast checker. There are tons of these available for free to input or measure your foreground color, the text, against the background color, usually a solid color or gradient or maybe an image. Now, high contrast doesn't mean we stop considering other things like font weight. A super thin font weight that happens to have high contrast against the background is still super illegible. But higher contrast usually leads to increased legibility, which is a great thing on the web. Next up is characters per line. We like to look at Stripe's documentation as a great example here. It's legible and it uses a container to constrict how far the text goes horizontally. If that container width didn't exist, someone's eyes would have to travel really far from left to right. Much easier to track with a container. And like we covered earlier, one way to do this is to set these limits on the maximum width of a text element to however many characters we want in a line. 60ch is equal to 60 zeros on whatever font you've selected. Then we have line height. Here's a line height of 1. We're using the unitless option, the hyphen from the dropdown. That means whatever the font size is, we're basically saying the height of each line of typography is equal to 1 times that font size. Way too close. At minimum, 1.25 is a tiny bit of breathing room, but more space between each line of text makes it much less heavy looking and much easier to track the end of one line and the start of the next. So consider line heights as you're optimizing text for legibility. Next is the penultimate note on the topic, clearly defined links. Here's a pattern we see a lot. To learn more and download this proposal, click here. Emphasis on here because that's the link. But it's not actionable. Technically it is, you can click it, but the link doesn't describe the action. Instead, using a much more direct description of the action makes the link far more relevant. To learn more, download the proposal. In this case, the link directly describes the action that'll happen when you go to the link. But there's another reason this is important, and that leads us to our last and one of the most important points here. Navigation through a document, through a web page, or even a full site should be tested not just for what it'll look like, but for how you can interact with it using a screen reader. This is a great way to develop an understanding of how people can navigate your content. And if it's just a link that says link, here's what someone hears if, for instance, they're tabbing through the document.
VoiceOver on system preferences. Entering screen reader example web content. Link, here, link, 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 link.
And that's a critical thing to consider when designing. Now, there's tons to consider here, and we're adding more and more teaching to Webflow University on the topic of accessibility and inclusive design, so keep checking back for more and more on the topic. But that's our last point on the topic. Always consider the legibility of your typefaces, consider how text alignment affects readability, same thing with all caps. Consider limiting your use of underlines so they're only associated with links. Think about contrast as it relates to legibility and the searing of a user's retinas. Keep an eye on the length of each line and the space between each line heights. Think about active, descriptive text when creating links. And always consider how your design is interpreted from all different kinds of browser experiences, including utilities like VoiceOver. But that's our overview, and we covered a lot today. We covered headings and how to use classes and tags to keep things consistent. We covered text fills and knockout text. We did paragraphs and inheritance. We covered wrapping text with spans to style only part of a text element. We covered units. We avoided a conversation about key distribution and quantum physics. And we went over some inclusive best practices to consider when making our designs even more accessible. And that's an overview of typography on the web.